Welcome to Corporate Caffeine. I'm Dacia Coffey. As a chief marketing officer, speaker, author, copywriter, and three-time entrepreneur, I've learned a thing or two about influence and impact in the business world. So I want to share with you what I've learned about how to be heard, be seen, and be successful, and introduce you to the people I've met along the way who learned how to unlock their potential. Welcome to Corporate Caffeine. Today, we are talking about examples of the easiest marketing plans for B2B companies. Now, I love this topic. And yes, I know I say I love a lot of topics, but you guys know I geek out on marketing. But of course, I brought Daisy McCarty, our lead chief marketing officer, back on to talk about this because we are going to get really, really specific. I mean, we're promising examples here, and I think there's just a lot of misunderstanding around marketing plans. And so, Daisy, that's actually where I want to start is before we bother giving examples of marketing plans, why don't we go ahead and level set on what is a marketing plan? Because I've seen some huge documents and that is not what I call a marketing document, no matter what a college textbook says.
Sure. So I think that for me, a marketing plan is the map of how you achieve your goals and how you define your success. So you have to have a map to get from one place to another, and your marketing plan really is that map.
I love the idea of a map, absolutely, because it does imply a journey. And I want to add a nuance onto that because yes, it's your journey to revenue, sure, but there's a buyer's journey. And when you're talking about a map, are you talking about the journey to revenue or are you talking about the buyer's journey?
Those two things actually overlap in some pretty interesting ways because in order to take a prospect from having never heard about your company to trusting you enough to signs a check over to you, they have to go through a journey. And the things that help them along each step of the way are outlined in your plan.
Yes, I love it. Okay, so it's one thing to have a paper map where you're like, I want to get here. And then there's specific highways and turns that you choose from. But I know for a lot of people in business, and especially when it comes to marketing, it just feels like this big blank landscape with either too many choices or just deer in the headlights. I don't even know. I don't even know where to start. So when we're talking about a map, where do we need to start? How do we set the coordinates or how do we even start to chart our options through that? What do we need?
I would say the first thing is always the buyer personas because this determines who you're talking to, where they are, what they need to hear, and what they need to know in order to take their next steps. And that needs to be in alignment with your brand truth. So knowing your buyers and knowing your business, bringing those two things together. That's the foundation. And then looking at your business model and your revenue model, it's going to help you define how much lift do you need from your marketing to achieve your business goals. And a lot of times businesses feel like their marketing plan isn't delivering for them. And it's because they haven't clearly aligned that definition of success on the marketing side with the definition of success on the business revenue side.
Yes, we will have to do a whole podcast episode on that one because that is one of my soapbox topics about alignment from leadership and financial metrics to marketing, but not for today. Sticking to the marketing plan examples. Okay, so buyer personas, I love that. And what I want to point out is you did not say competition. You didn't say, hey, focus on your buyer personas and look at what your competitors are doing. Because I know when I talk to a lot of clients, they are saying, well, should we do a webinar? Because competitor A over here is doing a webinar. Should we be on Facebook? Because competitor B over here is on Facebook. And so it's very me versus someone else in tactic oriented. But you're reminding people, no, it's about the buyer and about who they are as decision-making criteria.
And you nailed it when you said tactics, because that is a tactical approach. And there is an appropriate time to bring that set of factors into play, but it's not at the top level strategy portion. It's when you start prioritizing where are we going to spend, where are we going to align our resources, because then you start determining, okay, this is too hard to do because our competitors are going to outspend us. For example, on Google Ads, we can't compete there. And it's simply something that you look at later on in the marketing plan. It's not that very top level, which is always about who your buyers are, what your business is, and how you engage your buyers.
I love it. And I love that this keeps it simple because especially if we're talking to small businesses, keep it simple. If your buyers are not on that platform, do not read that information, do not search for things, do not make decisions in that way, you have total permission not to spend money, time, or attention in those places. Simply go where your buyers go and think through tactics in regards to whether or not your buyer finds value and whether or not your buyers are there. And that's where you should or should not market.
Absolutely. It's interesting as you look through the things that you can do, not everything is something that you should do. And when we build out marketing plans, we build in everything that you should be doing.
Yeah.
It may not be everything that you can do, but that's a next step.
That is a great point. Yeah, and we're definitely going to have to tackle that before we wrap this podcast today about, yes, document everything you can do, and then how do you prioritize that? So, okay, so number one, before you can even write a marketing plan, you have to have your buyer personas clearly identified. So then we've got that done. Let's pretend they've gone through all of our workbooks. They've done the good work. They've really clearly identified the human beings that impact their future success. So what now happens? Like, how do you figure out what tactics go in a marketing plan? Like, how do you start really building that map now that you know what compass you're following, which is your buyer persona?
The sales mapping process is really the next step. So before you build a marketing plan or figure out how you're going to execute on it, you need to really take an inventory of everything you're currently doing to impact that buyer at each stage of the journey, whether that's the awareness, whether that's consideration, or whether that's decision. And that can look like tactics, things that you're doing, and it can look like collateral, things that you're creating. And it's usually a blend of those, and they can be aligned clearly with each stage in that buyer journey. So you can look at, okay, we're doing a good job in the brand awareness section on social media, but we're not really driving traffic with organic search. So what can we do to elevate that area? And there are sometimes, 10 to 12 different things that you could be doing at each stage in terms of tactics and collateral. So you see, what are we doing well? What are we doing that we could optimize, and what areas have we not even started touching that really do have a lot of potential? And when we align those with each stage of the buyer journey, it becomes very evident what needs to go on the marketing plan, because you've just done the work of aligning what you need to do with who the buyer is, where they're going to be influenced, and how you can reach them.
I love that. So, okay, to reiterate, because I really want to make sure our audience is listening, when you're thinking about your map, it is awareness. So what tactics and tools are in awareness? And then we are in that middle portion, which you said was the consideration or the trust building, right?
Yes, and that's definitely a teaching and value providing stage.
Yeah. And so then the end part of the journey is closing the deal. And so really taking them across that. And so mapping the tactics and tools or the collateral that you're creating and how the buyer experiences them as they move closer to you. So I love this. So this is helpful. And as a reminder, one of the things that you said is all the things you can do. So this is some unrestrained thinking, as long as you're using your buyer personas as decision-making criteria, following what they would find valuable and what they would need in order to move their journey forward.
There's a little bit of a distinction here between could, should, and can that I'd like to dive into just a minute.
Okay.
Because if you had unlimited time, budget, and resources, and you wanted to do everything that your competitors are doing, that would be everything that you technically could do.
Yeah.
Definitely not everything that you should do. And what you should do is what comes to the forefront during the sales mapping process. And then when you start plugging that into a marketing plan and evaluating your internal, external resources, budget, etc., that's when you figure out, what can I realistically do and on what timeline can I do it?
Yes. Yes. I love it. Okay. So we promised examples. So in regards to the sales mapping, what are some examples of collateral or tools and tactics that might be in the awareness phase? Like, what does that look like?
When I talk to small businesses, a lot of them are doing some form of cold outreach. Once in a while, I'll meet somebody who's still doing cold calling, but often it looks like cold email or social media, reaching a new audience. Sometimes they're doing trade shows or conventions, if that's in the B2B space where there are a lot of those types of events happening. Sometimes they're doing some paid advertising, and this is often where they're spending a lot of money and really struggling to see results. So they're doing a blend of tactics in the awareness stage. One thing that they're often not doing as well as they could be is leveraging their referral relationships to grow their awareness among a new audience.
Yeah, really, really good point. And I'm just going to list a couple others that come to mind. So I love that you were tackling the live personal tactics, because I think that brings up a great point that when you're thinking marketing plan, this is all the ways you go to market. And that means sales and marketing. They are not separate. It is the same buyer going through the same journey, and they are navigating sales and marketing the entire time all the way through. So if we are mapping that sales journey and we're in that awareness, we've got those cold outreach, and I absolutely love that. And then there are, depending on people's budgets or their team, they could be doing search engine optimization. Are they ranking on Google? Or they could be being found on YouTube or on social media. But this is going back to one of the words that you use. These are the tactics that people find you cold. Referrals, or cold calling, or visibility tactics, where this is the first time they come across you, not later on.
That's right. This is that very initial stage where you're just asking them to pay attention, even if it's just a few seconds. And that's one of the areas where, as you're looking at what types of collateral and tactics do you use, it needs to be high emotional impact.
Yes, I love that. Absolutely. Okay, so that's the first part of the journey, is documenting the awareness tactics and tools that we have. So now when we're getting into that consideration, to that build trust phase of the circle. So if we're looking and we're mapping, where all of these things are. Okay, what are some examples of those things that are in that build trust, in that middle section of that buyer's journey where you're trying to guide people closer to becoming a client?
This tends to be where we see the most content creation happening, because this is how you deliver value. And it looks like website content, it looks like case studies, it looks like educational documents, it looks like building industry reports, white papers. This is where the downloadable resources go. So you're getting people further and further into that nurture funnel. This is also where I see a lot of companies doing educational events like webinars and roundtables, and hopefully a lot of speaking presentations, because speaking engagements are a really powerful source of authority and credibility building for small businesses.
Completely agree. And I want to add a little nuance at the risk of complicating things, but I don't think this will. There are some tactics that will be in multiple places, or it just depends on your business model. So for instance, we use speaking as an awareness tactic, and it's the first time they've ever heard about us, seen us, heard our company name, because someone hosted that. And so that is a very first touch. But then we also have speaking engagements where it is warmed up and where it is trust, because they've been following us and they finally decided, I'm going to attend their free event. So I think I just wanted to add a little bit of that nuance, because people just have to think about their environments and their buyers and what's the proper place to put it. Because I love that you were talking about the education piece, and it is a map. And so just making sure that you have put it in its proper place, and so that you're not trying to jump ahead of where the buyer might be.
Yeah, so a lot of that, when it comes to that type of engagement, is what topics are you covering? Because it's going to be different in the awareness stage, or you may deploy different people within your organization. Like, this person is really good at that initial introduction piece, and here's a subject matter expert that needs to come in for more of the educational piece. Website is another good example of something that plays multiple roles. So if you're doing SEO, which hopefully you are, organic SEO, that is part of the awareness stage, because people are finding you who didn't know about you before. But it also is where most of your content lives that you're using for that building trust stage as well.
Oh, such a great point. Absolutely. Okay, so we've got those. A couple other things that come to mind. Some software companies, for instance, they have a demo And so the demo goes somewhere in the middle, not in awareness, but in trust building and consideration. Sometimes this is where brochures, this is where presentations come in, that kind of thing. So then we move into close the deal. And I feel like anytime we're presenting a sales mapping exercise, people are surprised that marketers are talking about close the deal. Yeah. And I'm always like, hello, marketing should help you sell things. So of course we are going to. But why? Like, talk to me about why do we include close the deal in a marketing plan? And is it even possible to identify collateral and tactics that actually support the real human closing the deal and interaction that happens?
This is where it's very important to understand that marketing is not about stuff, it is about your brand. And a branded experience must be the same from first touch to last touch.
Nice.
We definitely don't want any disconnect from that awareness and nurture stage to suddenly, okay, now we're doing sales, we're closing the deal, all of our stuff looks ugly. It's not designed to delight people anymore. And one of the things we often look at is RFPs or proposal decks, because these need to have the same look and feel as a pitch deck. They need to have the same look and feel as the rest of the brand identity. It doesn't need to be, okay, we've stopped caring about making stuff nice and now it's all transactional.
Completely agree. Legal documentation does not have to be overwhelming and confusing and intimidating. There are appropriate and compliant ways to do that. And I think it's just respectful for the buyer going through that process, because they are starting to exhibit emotions that are nervousness and this better work. And how do I handle change management? How do I onboard this with my team? Is it going to do what I hope it does? So I would argue that buyer's remorse can actually happen way before it gets signed. And that's really the role of that marketing touch and making sure that you are choreographing those pieces that are part of the closing process, because you are respecting the fact that this is an intense scenario for the buyer and calming down any friction or overwhelm that they might be feeling so that they can move forward and solve the problem that you solve. So I think that's really important. And I love how you were talking about that brand experience, because I think that is absolutely critical, and it can really, turn something into a delightful experience for a customer.
And as just a couple more examples of things that go in that close the deal section of the buyer journey, things like building ROI calculators, exploring use cases, even onboarding steps for the client. Is that, a tedious email everybody back and forth, or is there a portal where they can go and give you whatever documentation you need, whatever discovery needs to happen to actually get them from closing the deal to implementation or launch or whatever their next step is? The more you can make that a streamlined, pleasant, nice process, the less of that hesitation and friction you're going to have in that final stage.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so that's the mapping process. I mean, that is know your buyer, make sure that you are going where your buyer goes, and thus, when you choose tactics and tools, you're naming the role that they play in guiding the buyer towards a solution. So I love this because that really is simple. However, we also promised more examples. So I know that we were giving tactical and tool examples as we go, but you've done this a lot because you brought up something earlier where, and you were mentioning can, should, would, could, and kind of what happens there. So you capture what you're doing and the ideas that you should be doing in your marketing plan, but then you do have to apply what are our constraints? What is our budget? What do we have time to implement? And so I would love to shift over into maybe some real world examples of some clients, especially small business clients that you've had where you did that, where you guided them through a sales mapping exercise. And so you have the big, shiny, amazing marketing plan. But then what did it look like when it came into actually prioritizing and executing? And, can you drive results when you have to be focused and limit what you're capable of doing?
You definitely can. And it does come down to making the right decisions at the right time. So I have one client that we built out a marketing plan, and it had everything that they should be doing over the next 12 to 24 months. And it had each one listed with the this overall strategy that we're driving toward, a list of all the tactics and collateral that would be created, and of course the KPIs, the metrics that are going to be tracked to see if is that actually working, and that becomes very important over time. And it's something you need to define up front. Otherwise, you're just going to be asking yourself, how do I feel this is doing?
Yeah, it's huge.
Did I get a good comment on this blog post? So it's good.
Huge. I know.
Rather than
Yes.
what analytics are we using? Do we have the visibility to even tell if something's working or not? Because if you don't have any way to track whether something's working, you better be very, very sure that it's something that works 100% of the time.
Completely agree.
So with this client, they had some immediate needs, and they were around speaking engagements, around being able to put together presentations. They needed to revamp what their brand positioning was, and they needed to be able to communicate that very clearly. So there was a set of collateral and items that they needed right away. So those were obviously a priority for them. And then as we looked at the other thing that they needed to create, it really was the business conversation. Are we going to focus on direct to client marketing? Are we going to focus on our strategic channel and distribution partners? And so it was defining what are the areas where we can do both at one time.
Yeah.
And those became a top priority. And then after that, how are we going to pull in additional items that are going to have the highest impact short term and the most significant impact long term. So it is a weighing conversation, and it has to do also with what can we help with and what do they have to do for themselves, because most of the time small businesses are very, very overwhelmed internally. So you have to have honest discussions about, if we ask you for these 5 things, is it going to take 5 weeks to get them?
Yes, exactly. Because you can't afford to delay impact on your business, revenue growth on your business, because you're too busy. And I think that's such a good point, is you do have to be practical with your time and the ability to move things forward.
And one of the ways that we keep market plans very, very simple is, even though the core plan may have a lot of things that are in this should do category, we only pull like 90 days at a time worth of things to actually do. We don't look at, over the next 12 months, we are going to do these 100 things, because that doesn't work and it doesn't happen. It doesn't get done. It's too much. It's too overwhelming. So once we've identified those highest priority, high impact, this is going to really hurt our business if we don't do it. This is going to help our business rapidly accelerate revenue. We pick those items. They're clearly defined. We've drilled down to what the specific tactics are, and we plug those into their roadmap for the next 90 days. And at that level, it's decided who's responsible for what's the timeline, what do we do if things start falling behind. We're going to revisit that and make sure either we've figured out a way to fix the problem or we reprioritize it. We decide, okay, is this still something that's relevant for the business? Because things can change very rapidly.
Yes. It's funny. This image in my head just immediately goes back to that map metaphor so specifically, because now you have the map laid out, and guess what? You get in the car with people and you figure out who's driving. And then how much gas do we need, which might be your budget, and where are we stopping? But you don't drive the whole journey in the first mile or 10 miles or 100 miles. You drive 1 mile at a time. You do one thing at a time. And I think that's absolutely really important. And it's really what you're outlining is you build the map, you get clarity, and then you go mile 1 and you make sure that you have the resources that are appropriate to actually keep hitting mile marker after mile marker, and that you don't get waylaid worrying about what's going to happen 1,000 miles down the road. You just make sure that you drive the path that you've outlined right now.
True. And if you look at the marketing plan example, you'll see that it's coded exactly the same way that the sales map is. So this is not reinventing the wheel or throwing out that previous process. You're actually just taking it, and it's not a circle anymore. It's just a list, but it's all categorized by what you're accomplishing. So you're still thinking about it in terms of which gaps am I filling here? Because you've identified all the things that you should be doing, and then you look at what are you actually not doing at all, or what are you doing so poorly that it's really hurting your business, in each of those steps along the buyer journey. So you're not left putting all of your eggs in one basket, all your focus on one stage of the journey and neglecting the other things that you really should be doing. And this matters, for example, if you're doing a lot of brand awareness because you haven't been doing it before. Oh, now we're finally doing lead gen. And then you drop off later in the sales process and you're not fulfilling that brand expectation that you've created. Now you've got all this lead generation, but it's not going to close.
No, exactly.
And it's very, very sad when that happens.
It really is. And we do see it. I'm sure there's some people out there being like, I would kill for leads. Contrary, you got to know what you're going to do with them. Make sure you can close them. So agreed. So I think the final thing to wrap this up too, and that you started really hinting at, and just to recap, is how do you build a marketing plan? And I like to go back to, because I need simple in my life. And, you were just talking about, you just keep following the process. And it is this ABC approach. And so A stands for align, which is align with your buyer personas. Go where they go. So then once you have done that and you have messaging and buyer personas identified, then you build your marketing plan. And you build and out of that marketing plan, using your priorities, you decide to build the first 90 days. Like, what are we going to build? And then once certain things are in place, you do champion, right? And champion is really where you could start adding money or additional resources because you've planned for success. And so I bring that up because I want to point out that how you experience marketing is exactly opposite of that. We experience the spend. We see the ad, right? Like we see the big whiz bang, and then we hit the big, the tools, the amazing tools, and we go through the process. But really, it was reverse engineered. It was built in reverse in order to make sure that the buyer went through that seamlessly. So hopefully I didn't add too much complexity, but going through align, then build, then champion or launch is actually really, really important. You cannot jump straight to tactics because you are only crossing your fingers that it'll work. You really have not done any work to guarantee that you're going to see outcomes. And you should. Like when you're launching your marketing plan, you should feel certainty that you are going to get results. And you're not saying, will this work? You're saying, when will this work? And yes. I think that's critical.
It is. And the nice thing about the structure that we use is that is one that makes sense once it's been explained. I've never gone through this process with a company that was like, this makes no sense to me. I'm totally confused by this. It's the underlying structure that you didn't know was there. And once it's made clear, it's so much easier to have the right conversation and stop having the conversation of, well, I think we should spend some Google ad money, or our competitors did a white paper, we need to do a white paper. It becomes about, we know exactly what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what to expect.
Yeah. Well, I love it. Thank you so much for giving us these examples. So I've got 2 different resources that we want to share with you today. So first off is you saw the graphics in this episode, and we have them in a workbook. So you can download that for free. You'll get a video tutorial on how to build your marketing plan and how to really make sure that you're following these principles. And you will see that they're simple. But for some people, they're going to get that workbook and they're going to go, I love this. I have no idea when or how I'm going to do this on my own. And so you've actually built a cohort where small businesses can go through this entire process all the way through and launch this really exciting business plan or marketing plan that's meant to drive results. Tell me a little bit about that.
The 8-week course is designed exactly for small businesses. So we identify their primary persona. So they're not chasing everybody that they could sell to. They're focusing on who they should sell to and who they can sell to. Yes, it's such a powerful thing to be very, very focused. And we build out the messaging. So they know who they're talking to. They know what they're saying. It aligns with their brand truth. We do an overview of digital marketing, content marketing, enough that small businesses know when they're making good decisions and when they're being sold on an idea that's not right for their business. And that's really the level of knowledge that small business owners need to have. So people like you and me can stop hearing the stories about how they spent $100,000 on marketing.
Yes.
And didn't get a single thing from it.
Yes. They cannot afford to keep wasting money and learning the hard way. And that's what I love about this program is they don't have to. Marketing is one of those incredibly dangerous places to spend money that you get nothing in return. And unfortunately, that's all too common.
It can be. And we do go through the sales mapping process in detail. And then each business owner gets to build that custom marketing plan, the one that's right for them, and turn that into an execution roadmap so they know exactly what their next 90 days looks like, what they need to do to start launching on their goals.
And what I get so excited about is these are the skills that stay with them for the entirety of their business. So will this build traction and growth for them? Yes. But guess what? It's going to do it at your next phase and your next phase too. And so you go in educated as your business grows because now you have fundamental principles about what it takes to get to the next level. So I love it. So if you guys are interested, we've also got a link, including pricing and the whole overview of what this process looks like. And so we will have that in the show notes. Daisy McCarty, thank you so much, as always, for sharing your brilliance and your insight. I just really appreciate it and have so much fun when you're on the show.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Awesome. Onward and upward, you guys. If you enjoyed this episode of the Corporate Caffeine Podcast, please help us help you by subscribing. I also hope you'll find us on social media. You can follow me, Dacia Coffey, and my company, The Marketing Blender, by searching us on your favorite platform or checking out the show notes for the links. We bring this to you because we envision a business world full of meaning, connection, and prosperity for us all. Until next time, onward and upward.